You're listening to the Product Coalition podcast with Jay Stansell. This is where product mastery happens. This is where careers are made. Welcome to the Product Coalition podcast. Let's go.
Welcome back, everyone. My name's Jay Stansell, and today I'm joined by Andrew Sachs. He's employee number 3 at Smartling and a veteran who has steered product strategy across the early web, SaaS, and now AI. He's shipped with giants like MasterCard, British Airways, Verizon, and he still keeps his builder hours going, his sleeves rolled up in roadmaps and architecture. Some quick context on Smartling. They're New York-based. They're founded in 2010, and today it's all about localization. And this business has been doing it for over 15 years. So Andrew sees a common tension everywhere, and that is that teams ship globally from day one, but they design and they test in English, and that creates localization debt. It's the quiet cost of English-only assumptions that blow up timelines, break flows, and cap your growth when you finally start adding languages. But there's a shift that's underway that Andrew's going to talk to us about, and that is with AI in the loop. Localization plugs straight into your stack. You can prototype with translated content. You can approach model linguistic variations from the start and validate flows across languages before they fail. So you're getting the same speed, fewer surprises, but much stronger releases. Andrew's going to lay out a global first framework that does not slow down that early iteration we all crave. We'll get into the architectural calls that prevent bottlenecks and the workflow moves that make translation feel like any other API call. You're also going to hear why designing for multiple languages early can sharpen your product for everyone, not just for entering into those new markets. So if you lead product and you think we'll localize later on, then this one's all for you. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Andrew, I'm really excited to have this episode and this topic around localization debt. It's one, to be honest, that no one's come to me before in 7 years of doing these podcasts. It's one that is probably a side or afterthought for many people in product, or it's a thought they go into when entering new markets. So I'm really excited to sit down with someone that lives and breathes localization as a product owner on the day-to-day.
Yep. Yeah. It's definitely something that is kind of an afterthought in many cases, and is kind of one of those behind the scene things that you, when you're using this website or an app or something in a language, the language is just there. You don't really think about how all of that language happened. But there's a lot of complexity and a lot of things that really go into making sure the language can get on a site. And as teams and product teams are trying to ship quickly and get things out more quickly, and the continuous delivery methods of development, you really have to have a strategy of how you're going to incorporate language into the overall development process and product process, for sure.
Andrew, you've been in product for 2 decades. Can I ask, when did the English first paradigm start to resonate with you and you start to recognize that? And how has your experience at Smartling changed the way you think about language in product?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the founders of Smartling, I had worked with him at a previous company, and we were trying to localize the website, and none of us had done it before, and it was going to cost like millions of dollars and take 2 years to do, and it was just like some crazy thing. So he had the idea to there has to be a better way to do it. And once you start looking at all of the complexities and where your strings and content lives, and how things might wrap on the page and all of those types of things, you really start to see that there is a lot of like product process and development things that need to be thought about to make sure that the language can happen on your website and apps. And as part of the product process, like we try to build tools that help developers and product managers and people really try to get ahead of the localization bottlenecks, I guess. and make sure that you have the tools that can really be built and ingrained into your entire process from the very beginning. Those tool sets and that mindset are really what kind of tries to make it a lot easier than spending 3 years and $3 million or something and trying to translate something.
Nice. We're going to be talking about localization debt. We're all familiar with tech debt. Can you give us some definitions around localization debt, Andrew? What does that typically look like? What are some early warning signs that you're collecting some of this type of debt?
Yeah, I'd say it really starts with like when it's an afterthought, when suddenly someone comes to you and they're like, oh, we have to localize this new feature or something, or this new part of the website. And you're like, oh, how do we do that? You just try to start hack things together. And if you start opening up an Excel file or a Google spreadsheet that has a list of content in it that you need to try to get translated, then you're starting to build up that debt already, because you're going into these manual processes of like finding strings and copying and pasting and doing all this stuff, and you haven't built out the frameworks to extract the content and get it into a build process and have the review process for someone who actually maybe speaks the language, reviewed the content on your website or app as the language would be translated. So you really start to like, if you're doing anything manual and you have to be involved in the process, then you already have debt that it's going to be hard to get rid of over time, and it just keeps building up.
Okay. I mentioned at the start, Smartling, 15 years in this game. Can I ask, Andrew, could you talk me through what are the versions of solving localization debt over the last 15 years? We're obviously in the AI generation right now, but
Yeah.
if we go back to the start, how did it used to happen, and what have been versions 1, 2, and 3 that you've seen over the last 15 years?
Yeah, do you know what? There were really kind of there have been kind of three big movements, at least in the time since I've been in it, since Smartling has been around. I like to think that we actually have helped push the industry into some of these big changes. And one, it sounds ridiculous to say now, but really moving to the cloud was probably the biggest thing. We were probably the first, or one of the first translation providers to actually be in the cloud and suited in a way for tech companies to really, were some of our first primary customers who were also in the cloud, to be able to utilize some of these technologies. And so that was kind of a big one. And once you have kind of this openness of building out your own websites and applications, you start to convince people that, oh, you don't need to email that file around to your translation agency. You don't need to like throw it over a wall and hope that you get it back at some point in the future. You really have no idea. And so really kind of cloud was one of the big things. And kind of along with that is translation was always a kind of a black box. You take your content, you send it to someone, and then at some point in the future, you get it back and you get cost for it and you get charged for it. So we really kind of changed that paradigm of openness and being able to see the entire translation process. The second one was really machine translation, and machine translation has existed for decades, for as long as we can probably remember. But there was a point where even Google Translate and some other providers and neural machine translation networks and things were starting to get pretty good. And you could almost use them as a base for translation, but still have humans in the process. And that was kind of the whole human in the loop process for translation, which also applies to many, many other industries. But that was starting to be a big change. And every time you eliminate a human from that process, you also eliminate cost, and you eliminate time, and you eliminate risk, and a bunch of other things that kind of go along with it. So that was kind of a big shift. And at Smartling, we really embraced NMT engines, and had some of our own, and really used Google and Amazon and everyone who kind of had these. And of course, the third is AI, and it is really having a truly profound impact on the localization industry. It's when you think about someone translating content, has been forever someone sitting in front of a computer and typing in words. But that is kind of shifting a bit and being more where the humans are maybe validators or QA checkers or sampling content to see if it matches style and quality and things like that. But it is becoming less of a human-powered industry. And really just in the last 3 years, that shift has really been transformative. And again, you reduce costs, you have almost instant translation, and you can still have things adhere to your organization's brand guidelines, terminology, and style guides, and all the things that are important in language.
Andrew, you mentioned some competitors there, so I'm gonna go down that road now. Now you've opened it up. It's probably the most common question I imagine you've had at Smartling, and that is, can you explain for the audience what is the competitive difference you see as a product leader between Smartling and Google Translate?
Yeah, so we wouldn't even put like a Google Translate in the competitive box. Google Translate and really even LLMs at this point and AI tools are not, we wouldn't really consider them competitive tools. And they are, they help us get a head start. They help us enable translation. But we really, like if you speak 65 languages and you say, hey, ChatGPT, translate this document into 65 languages, are you going to immediately post that to your website? Is that going to be on your homepage? Is that going to be in the magazine ad that's printed? Highly unlikely. You still need some sort of assurance that your content is using your terminology and meeting your brand guidelines, and all of those types of things are important for an organization. You don't want to risk having something crazy get out on the internet or in public at all. So we use AI and we use Google Translate at least as a starting point for a translation. And then we have our own tool sets that we use to really assess the quality and see if it needs to go to a human, and different models that determine if it needs to go to a human for review. Or we use AI to fix as much of the translations as we can, whether the translation was generated by an LLM or Google Translate or wherever it came from. In Smartling, we call them linguistic assets. We store everyone's style guides for their organization, all of their brand names, all of their product names. Do they use formal language or informal? We really store all of their source content, from help documentation and advertising and website content and HR content, and legal content, all these different things. So we have all of this information in the platform that we can use to build models to determine, to both generate translations that are in adherence with an organization's needs, as well as to estimate and assess quality. So the starting point of using Google Translate or an LLM is really just one part of the entire process. And then if you need to involve a human in it, you can. Like if you have a legal contract or a patent application or healthcare information, you're probably going to want to have a human involved just from a legal and risk standpoint. And so there's still a bunch of things that are involved in the process besides just generating a translation.
I certainly appreciate that. Even in my home, there's Portuguese, Russian, and English all being spoken, and we've had those moments where you use Google Translate and it doesn't quite translate. It's too direct, and it misses that richer context. And I think what's always fascinating when it comes to talking about language is evolving. We've got new words, new vocabularies being driven and pushed forward all of the time.
For sure. It's very subjective. Like what is good for one person isn't good for another person, and the terminology and words used really can make a difference. And Google Translate and even LLMs are as good as the language in which they are trained on. So maybe they are trained on languages or a set of content or something that is maybe of a different caliber or a different tone or something than maybe what you want for your organization and your business. So it is important to have these other things in the process to make sure that we can take whatever maybe was first generated and adjust it to meet an organization's needs. But Google Translate's great for like just getting the idea of what someone may have said.
Nice. Yeah. And I think you've brought it back there to around the quality piece, which I've admittedly in my career when going through translation processes and products I've touched, is something that I've always found difficult to assess that quality without bringing those first language speakers in to read it and give you their input. And even then, the iteration cycles are very, very slow because then you've got the human back in the loop and it's all slowed down again.
Yeah, totally. And we do so much, we still do a lot of human review and human assessment. And maybe it's after the fact, after something has been delivered, but we're always looking to see, like even in our LLM and AI tooling, like is something drifting from where it was originally started, or are we still, and we have different confidence levels of quality that we try to meet for different language pairs. And so we still use humans kind of in the background to make sure that we have all the data and things that we can have confidence to give our customers, that we're still trying to deliver the best translation. And that for English and Spanish and French, and Japanese and Chinese, whatever, where there's a lot of language content out there, things can work pretty well. But as you get to that long tail of languages where maybe there's less content written that engines and LLMs and things are trained on, then you really start to probably need some more human involvement.
And I see that firsthand. European Portuguese is the version of Portuguese I have around me here in Lisbon, but all translation, even from Apple at an operating system level, is Brazilian Portuguese.
Totally.
Those nuances and differences in language to the locals here, they would interpret the product differently if I wrote it in Brazilian Portuguese versus European native Portuguese for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like Portuguese is one, and Spanish, of course, all the different variations of Spanish that exist around the world. And like we have customers who will translate into like 180 languages, and they really, some of them really try to get to like the local dialect in some cases, just because they really care that their sets of users are experiencing that in the language and dialects that they use. So you can kind of do the broad swath of Portuguese and try to cover as much as you can, but you can also get as narrow as you want to.
Nice, nice. You do bring back a memory for me when I remember Facebook, you could translate it to pirate. And I think
Yeah,
that's an April Fool's thing that just rolled on out as a unique language. But Andrew, I want to bring the conversation back to building products. So 2026, people are building their roadmaps. What does a global first product development actually look like in practice? How do you start thinking of wrapping in technologies like this to be globally relevant from the get-go in 2026?
I would say it really, if you're starting new and your business is new and you're building a new application or something, really start with the mindset that like you need a way to see your content. If you can't see everything that's being written and showing up on your website or application, then you already have a fundamental problem. A lot of kind of legacy sites and applications organizations weren't built with language in mind, and that's where you get to be a little bit more, you have a few more bottlenecks and a few more problems, but there are tools, and we provide tools and things like that to help extract and find content within repositories and websites and things like that. Also, if you're using like a content management system or like a marketing platform or something, make sure that as you're evaluating all those different tools, make sure that those support language also, and they have true language support in their platforms. Like we support 50, 60 connectors and different third-party platforms, and some of them don't have language built in, and it really creates a cumbersome kind of mess within those applications. We try to work around it, but if they have language built in, then you're already ahead, you're already a step ahead. And I think like third is really making sure that everyone is involved in the process, because it is both a product development process, but it's also going to be a development process, and make sure that you have a way to automate that entire process, whether it's automation from GitHub or just automatically pushing files in through an API. There should be some way to automate all of that content, and whatever platform you have on the other side, hopefully it's Smartling, that we can handle all of those files and all the different content, do the diffing and differences and all the different things that might come in from how this content is being pushed into the platform. So it's really trying to make sure that you have both the product process, and that also includes, sorry, I should have mentioned that also includes design. So as you're thinking about how you're designing content, and your UX and UI designers, are they working in Figma, and can they get a machine translation or a pseudo translation or something it is, so they can see how the content might impact the layout of their designs. And then also working with engineering and development teams to make sure that you have that round trip automated process. But it doesn't have to be as complex and cumbersome as people kind of make it, if you kind of start with the right frameworks in mind.
Nice. You touched on UI UX. I'd like to go there for a minute, Andrew. The There's some, I suppose, heuristics around UX when it comes to localization. From my experience, we're expecting to see a flag in the top corner, but I've also found, for instance, I live in Portugal. The flag I see is Portuguese, but I have the option to view in English, even though the localization of pricing, shipping,
Yep.
etc., is all going to be Portuguese relevant. But then there's also my browser language and what I've got that set to as well. Is there any sort of first principles you can share with product and design leaders when it comes to those UX heuristics to consider language switching and setting for product owners?
Yeah. It's funny. Like I remember when we first started, basically everyone used kind of a flag to indicate language, but flag is location and geography, not necessarily language. So really, if you're working on a website and building a website or application, really the user's preferred language for browser or app or phone or whatever is how you should really be determining that. And then, like, of course, like e-commerce sites maybe need a more geographic specificity to be specific on geography for shipping and currency and things like that. But really, the flag for a country doesn't necessarily mean language, and that's probably something you should steer clear of. And I think in some cases it is even offensive to people when you use a flag to indicate language. So yeah, definitely use what the user prefers.
Nice. I mean, I'm going to have to go there then, using the US flag to represent English as an English person. You definitely know where the product was made when you see that, and I can appreciate
totally
that as well.
Yeah, I often see, and even as like the US flag often gets used, I often see, being American and in the US, I often see the British flag being used. And I'm like,
Yep.
well, is it coming from Britain? Like, what's happening here? Or they it's like both flags like cut in half or something. It's like, okay, that maybe, I guess that was a hack around it somehow.
Yeah, how many flags can you fit? Fantastic. Okay, thank you. The next point, coming back to integration of this global first mindset, Andrew, is how do you build a business case around that? How do you convince a team, an executive, or a board that building in these linguistic variations of what people experience is important? What does a good business case look like for that? And what do people typically forget or miss out when it comes to preparing a business case like that?
Yeah, do you know what? It's really like, it's so different for every customer that we have. I know there's some in like regulated industries that are required to have language, and so their business case is that they're required to have things in certain sets of languages. I think when you're doing like e-commerce and things like that, you probably have a little bit more of a business case, but then it gets complicated with, can you ship to these places? Can you work in certain currencies and all these types of things? And then there's more of the kind of service type of businesses where, and even B2B and enterprise type of companies, where do you have a sales team in location? Are people going to expect support and help in language? Are your help docs in language? Is it just your marketing website? Is it your entire application? So there's a lot of different kind of facets that people need to look at when determining if they are actually going to add a language, because it does imply a lot about your business. It does imply that, like, if you're in France and you have your website is in French and you have a French customer, that someone's going to pick up if you call them, someone's going to pick up an answer in French. And we've seen customers, especially in France and Germany, I think, where they translated everything in French and German, but they didn't have any French or German speakers, or support wasn't in French and German. And it really kind of angers probably some customers in those markets. So you really have to be careful with it. It's not something to like take lightly, probably, as far as adding language. It is something that is meaningful to a business. It's just like adding a new product line, and it is something to really be thoughtful about. I think a lot of our customers at least, look at even just where website visits are coming from to indicate if maybe there is more of a market that they haven't explored for when adding a language. And there's always a statistic going around of like 70% of people want to buy in their own language or something like that. And a lot of places you can probably get by with English, actually. But if you are trying to be serious about it and you want to really see a market shift, then you probably need to go in language. And we had a big e-commerce company based in the UK, and they have in the last year and a half or something, launched, I don't know, 20 languages, and they had it's a huge company. They had a bunch of ways to get product out to all these different markets. But even in their earnings calls, they talk about how adding language and translating their website and their product catalogs really shifted their business, and it really was pretty fundamental. So they had a pretty big use case, and they were able to see it through.
Can I ask, what's the right delivery approach on that? You mentioned in that instance they've delivered X number of languages. Should product teams be looking at the backlog around localization on a per language basis, or do they typically get pushed through in batches? What's that normally look like?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like once you add one, why not add 50 type of thing? Because if you have the frameworks and the technology and everything in place, like the incremental effort is probably not tremendous. But there's always going to be some cost to it, and there's always going to be maintenance to something, and there's always going to be someone who writes in and complains about the language that was used or a word that was used. So you really have to be ready for kind of the what comes next. There's getting the language out there, but then there is all of your customers and users who are going to have feedback and are going to have expectations. So if you need to launch in one language and just have Spanish or French or whatever it is, then go for it. But you don't have to go extreme.
Okay. You mentioned UK there. You're obviously a US business. At a strategic product level, can I ask how are you handling PII, on-device data translation, and jurisdiction constraints that happen in between US, UK, and Europe?
Yeah, so we have, I think maybe half of our customers are now in Europe, and we have a pretty big presence in the UK, and I think Dublin is actually our largest office right now, where our employees are. So, and we have data centers, and we're primarily Amazon based. So we have data centers throughout the world, wherever Amazon has a data center, basically. So we're pretty well set up for supporting all of the different rules and GDPR and the US HIPAA and all these different things for handling sensitive content. And if customers end up sending us content that has maybe PII or PHI for health information, we have ways to help kind of detect that and delete it and remove it and mask it and whatever we might need to do. So we do have tools to help handle that. And as a business, we're already set up to handle kind of global markets and global business.
Coming back to a global level, text to speech, speech to text are becoming very natural patterns for engaging with products as opposed to written text on the page only. What does that mean for Smartling, and how has the trend change of people talking to their computers, not typing to their computers, and changed the future for you?
Yep. Yeah. So I think I would say watch us in 2026, and we'll have some more announcements around that. I think there's still even with text to speech and like AI dubbing and all these types of things, a lot of that still, even though it is voice and audio, a lot of that still does often start in text and is trained. Those models are trained by the same assets that you might train for text writing and translation. So you still want to make sure if you have an AI dubbing person talking about your business or something, that they're still using the terminology that you want to use, that they're still talking in the way that is representative of your business, that they're saying your business name correctly. So all these things that we store in our platform to influence the outcome of translation also can influence the outcome of audio and video and dubbing and subtitling and transcreation and transcription and all these different things. So there's a lot of commonality that goes in there. And often even for video, for subtitling and video and dubbing and audio and things, you can still want the text output at some point to review and understand what was said and how people are interacting with all these different AI tools and things. So there's still a lot of commonality and a lot of the base frameworks of what goes into the inputs and outputs for this thing.
Andrew, with the rise of vibe coding, AI devs, the volume of internal-based applications and software is going up significantly. Are you seeing a trend in demand so that internal teams can communicate with each other without having to learn a common language through integrating something like Smartling into internal products? Or is most of your business foreseeable on customer-facing products in the future?
Yeah, primarily customer facing. One thing that we really started to see a pickup is really we want to be wherever our customers and their users are trying to get translation or trying to communicate in language. So we do provide tools to both get translation or integrate into different services that might be internal communication platforms. One thing we've seen pick up a lot in the last 6 months, 8 months is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's called MCP server, Model Context Protocol. And it's like a way to like get third-party applications into LLMs and chatbots and things like that. And we've seen a lot of our customers have enterprise chatbots, and they've built their own. Some are licensed from OpenAI and Anthropic and whatever. And building a Smartling into having access to Smartling through those tools has been a huge success, because they can, throughout an organization, they're already typing in language, and they can just reference Smartling to translate something without ever having to log in to Smartling itself, and still have the control over the type of quality translation that you get. So there are certainly ways where internal tools and internal teams are starting to benefit from these technologies as well.
Okay. The last one for you, Andrew, is I've got a pair of AirPods 3 rocking up next week. One of the reasons I'm excited, AirPods 3 Pro, because of the streaming translation feature.
Yeah.
Translation has always been transactional up to now. I give you English, you give me French back once you read it in English. Can I ask, what do you foresee changing when it comes to streaming of translation? Is there a genuine need for that? And is that something you're expecting to scale into in the years ahead?
I don't know I think as Smartling as a business, I think we will be in probably the real-time aspect of translating content, and probably like live events or live webinars or something like that. I don't see us getting into anything that is maybe more consumer focused, or something where we're influencing the translations that maybe someone is having with their family or something like that. But certainly a real-time aspect will be in our future.
Okay, fantastic. I'm sure that's a whole new world of
whole new world
to work through. Andrew,
Yep.
This has been a fascinating chat. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is great.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you to the audience for listening in to Andrew Sachs and myself talking about localization debt. If you'd like to learn more about Andrew and Smartling, please check out the show notes for today's episode. And if you'd like to learn more about Product Coalition, head over to productcoalition.com. Until next episode, thank you very much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Product Coalition podcast, hosted by Jay Stansell. Got questions or want to explore more topics? Connect with Jay on LinkedIn or join the ever-growing Product Coalition community on Substack. Thanks for listening.